Well, thank you for that introduction, Don. You must have been talking to my mother to get some pointers about what I should say at the start. And it's great to be here. And thank you, Joe, for, I think it's an invitation. I'm not sure when you asked me to come, is it an invitation or is it an instruction or whatever it is? But it's great to be here. So this is my third time, and Joe was suggesting I think I might get it right this time. So we'll see how we get on. And I must say I welcome debate and engagement. I think it's very important. I'm not sure, maybe with the exception of Don and some colleagues, I'm not quite sure if many of my predecessors would have engaged at these sort of fora. Maybe I'm being unfair and there was a different time and a different culture, but I certainly welcome this engagement and debate, and I even welcome debating with Eddie. Some of the time, but not all the time. I'm not going to respond or rebut Eddie's critique of Kevin's report. I let Kevin do that during the Q&A. But I think it was a bit unfair and a bit selective. But Kevin can come back later and address those comments. And of course, it's not the final word. It's a report. It's a contribution. And we have to reflect now. And Minister Howlin will be coming up with his proposals in September on these matters. But I should, of course, thank Eddie for his complimentary remarks about the department. It's much appreciated, and for the work that we have done. I'm impressed about the attendance here on this very warm afternoon to discuss this incredibly esoteric topic. Like, I have spent a long time debating the ins and outs of this, and during the earlier contributions I was thinking, God, like, this really is complex, and it's very warm. It reminds me of my first day in secondary school. The English teacher came in and he said, "Open the window, we'll all die of asphyxiation." And he picked the guy in the corner and he said to him, "What's asphyxiation mean?" And he said, "It means we'll suffocate, sir." And he said, "Very good." That guy, I won't name his name, is now an editor of a tabloid newspaper in Dublin. And every time I meet, he says, "I've never used a word even nearly as long as asphyxiation in my 25 years as a journalist." But it just came to mind, Joe, in this warm meeting. So I should say that I'm very proud to be a civil servant. I'm very proud to work with government on so many issues and to advise on policies which have such a profound impact upon people's lives. And I am accountable for the work I do, like other senior colleagues, and I'll talk about some of that in a moment. I'll try not to go through the 1997 Public Service Act clause by clause, okay? But I'm happy to talk about it in detail afterwards, but I'll spare you that because it becomes somewhat complicated. But there are 4 questions I'd like to, and the good English teacher from Art School Reach always start off what you're going to say it, and then say it again. So I'm going to 4 questions. Are we accountable enough? What level of accountability is enough? What are the options for further change? How does accountability link with performance? And the scene really is, and Eddie touched on this about the neutrality and trust and role of a permanent civil servant. I'd like to quote, and this is my first and last quote, "It may safely be asserted that as matters now stand, the government of the country could not be carried on without the aid of an efficient body of permanent officers occupying a position duly subordinate to that of the ministers, yet possessing sufficient independence, character, ability and experience to be able to advise, assist and to some extent influence those who are from time to time set over them." And their words taken from a report on civil service reform in 1854. So some of these issues have been debated before, which reminds me of the story about Prime Minister Salisbury, who has said, "We're going to engage in reform," and he said, "Are things not bad enough already?" But these issues have been touched upon before. And there's a lot of focus on what's gone wrong with the civil service, or what's wrong, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But the civil service has played an important role through the history of our state and has had many episodes of incredible achievement. I'm not going to go through them, but people know the challenges that we faced and how the civil service has responded. But of course, we've made mistakes also. In a properly functioning democracy, the civil servant should never supplant the role of the minister. It is the minister who is elected by the people, and the civil servant steers a tricky course in striving to serve the government of the day, while also adhering to the core values of neutrality, impartiality and service to the public interest. This relationship works best where there is one of mutual trust. And there are tensions between the maintenance of this trust and the public of every difference, which certain interpretations of accountability might demand. And we all know in this room that no relationship, work-based or otherwise private, could withstand that level of scrutiny without maintaining mutual openness and trust. There's a very strong balance all the time and very strong trade-offs in terms of the relationship between civil servants and ministers. I don't have any difficulty reconciling the sort of moral questions, if they're moral questions, that Eddie was putting. I'm very clear in my role. My role is to advise, in the public interest, the Minister and the Government, and to advise to the best of my ability what we should do, and then to debate and to reflect, and then to implement the policies decided by the Minister. So I don't really understand, and maybe we can talk a bit more during the Q&A, exactly this great dilemma that Eddie is postulating, because I've never faced it in my career, and I've been in this job for a few years now. I understand what my role is, and I think all my colleagues do also. Of course, it's the right of the Minister of the day to promote the merits of policy, and is the Minister who will publicly reward at the ballot box for successes are equally answerable for policy failures. And it's equally right that Secretary-Generals and senior civil servants are answerable for their performance. So, the question then, are we accountable enough? The Public Service Management Act sets out clearly the responsibilities of a Secretary-General: managing department, preparing ministers with statement of strategy, providing advice, ensuring arrangements are in place to facilitate the effective response to policy issues, ensuring resources are used appropriately, and so on and so on and so forth. And under the 1866 Exchequer and Audit Department Act Appropriation Act, which I'm sure people are familiar with, it sets out quite clearly our responsibilities in relation to public money and the expenditure of public money. And that's accountability takes in the form of presentations and witness appearances and so on in front of the PAC, which people will be well aware of the PAC and their role. And that's a very strong part of the accountability environment under which we operate. And that was the existing position. And I sort of wonder, Eddie spoke what Pat Rabbitte said Deputy Rabbitte said in 2011. I wonder what he'd say now, given what's changed over the last number of years. I wonder would he still hold the same views about the structural problems and the relationship between ministers and civil servants. And it'd be interesting, maybe, Joe, to invite Pat at a future date to give his views now, because a number of changes have taken place due to Minister Howlin. FOI Act has been strengthened dramatically, and it will be passed all stages in the Dáil. It will be passed in the Seanad in September, which strengthens the Act and leads to the most transparent regime of any country in the developed world. And many of the issues, again, that Eddie raised about not knowing what's going on and not knowing what advice is given between it, that's just not the case. And there are plenty of journalists down there who use FOI all the time who will outline the extent to which you can access the conversations that are taking place. And under the Act, it will be easier to access those debates and those conversations within the system. The Public Interest Disclosures Act, the Whistleblowers legislation, is an act which provides, for the first time, protections for people who identify issues in departments and who bring those to the attention of their superiors and others without fear of reply. It's a very important piece of legislation which will address concerns that existed for a long time. The legislation of lobbying bill has been published. The House of the Oireachtas Inquiry Bill has enacted. And again, this has eased the restrictions on civil servants giving evidence to Oireachtas committees. So it is now, and again, sorry Eddie for keep on saying this, contradicting what you said, but it now does allow civil servants to set out the policy options and the advice that it gave to ministers. So that can happen routinely. And in the context of public inquiries as set out under the Oireachtas Act, those restrictions are eased even further. So I would contend that we had a very well-developed system of accountability, and we've added and improved that through a variety of different changes that we've made over the last number of years. What level of accountability is enough? And I think the period since 2008 has been incredibly difficult and painful for many people, backgrounds, socio-economic groups and ages. We can have a debate about exactly where responsibility lies for the crash, whether it was the role of banks, the regulator, civil service, the political system, whatever. We can have a debate, and I don't necessarily agree with some of the things that have been said about the role of the civil service in terms of the crash, but we can have that debate. But quite rightly, accountability and the quest for it have become a much stronger feature of our political discourse, and is a subject of much academic and media commentary and public discussion on foot of the crash that took place. And the reasons for this are very clear. Accountability goes in hand with responsibility, notions of trust, ownership, and, where appropriate, blame. And that's the way it should be. And accountability, of course, is multifaceted and comes in many different ways. The vast majority of civil servants are engaged in delivery of services directly to the public, and we're judged on the basis of how we do our job. And this comes in many different ways: the payment of social welfare payments, processing of grants, the collection of taxes, the organisation of second-level exams, and so on and so forth. And our services are largely transacted in public, and the feedback, as a direct form of accountability, the feedback can be very direct and immediate and can be brutally honest as well on many occasions. And it's reassuring to try benchmark where we are in the system. Where does Ireland compare to other European countries? It's very difficult to get good data on this, but the most recent data we have suggests the quality of Irish public administration is above the EU average. Now, we need to do better, but it is currently estimated to be above the EU average. Now, just to take a number of aspects of that, our public services are seen to be relatively unbureaucratic. We're seen to be the best in Europe in terms of supporting competition and providing a supporting regulatory environment, which is a key part of the role of the civil service. And we score highly when it comes to upholding traditional public service values such as independence from political interference, freedom from bribery, corruption, reliability and administrative fairness. And our indicators and scores, and this is based on surveys of citizens in Ireland, our performance on those particular issues has actually increased in each of the last 3 years. But of course we recognise that we need to do more. I'm not going to go in to a detailed exposition of our successes and the things that we've done well, but it's useful to just focus on two. The presidency, our presidency of the EU, was an incredibly successful event and reflected incredibly well on the Irish civil service and is recognised as such across Europe. We had over 2,500 meetings and delivered on a whole variety of very important policy initiatives across the European Union. The Troika programme, painful and as difficult as it was, the management and implementation of that programme was very effective implementation and delivery, which has been very important in providing the basis for the economic recovery that we're now seeing. And I think it's very regrettable that the public discourse about the civil service focuses on the negative. It focuses on the failings. It focuses on the mishaps, the problems. And unfortunately, it doesn't in any way cover the successes. And maybe that's the reality of the media culture that we have now. But I think a more balanced assessment, a more balanced coverage would lead to a different assessment of how well we're doing. And I think it's very important that we embrace what Kevin has suggested and this agenda, that we hold on to the core values of the system. So any change in current accountability shouldn't damage the core values of the civil service. So we accept, and leadership of the civil service accepts, that while we have a very well developed framework, it is not enough, and we need to strengthen accountability arrangements. And this is evidenced by the consultation process which we've engaged in. And we need a new chapter, and as a service we need to be more effective, more responsive and higher performing. And this must be clearly evident to the public. So we have accepted this challenge, and we're responding to this challenge in a response to this work and the agenda set by Minister Howell. And by strengthening accountability, the civil service and our political system can be empowered to work better. This will help build trust that informed choices are being made on behalf of the public, trust that correct procedures are being adhered to, and trust that public money is being spent in an effective way. So let's look at some of the options. And we published a report last January prepared by Civil Service, my own department, on strengthening civil service accountability performance, which I think is an excellent piece of work, but I would say that, wouldn't I? And it does flow from the commitments, as Kevin has mentioned, in the programme for government. And on foot of that, we decided the best way of advancing this was to have an external group to look and to probe and to come up with recommendations. And that's what Professor Rafter and the panel have done, and we thank Kevin for all his work. The panel sets out a variety of recommendations: accountability board, performance management system for SecGens, external reviews of government departments and offices. And I have to say, at a personal level, I support and agree with the vast majority of these recommendations. I think they provide us with a useful way forward. And they're really around clarifying the role of ministers in civil service, making sure there's no ambiguity about the role. It's about developing a stronger centre, and it's about developing a uniform civil service which is very much focused on performance and accountability. In September, Minister Howell will come out with his response and the government's response to the renewal plan, and will also set out further initiatives to improve the capacity of the civil service and to set out our vision for the renewal of the civil service. And I'm not going to set out here this afternoon all the ideas. My experience is that ministers tend to like to make their own announcements rather than civil service doing it in advance. They get upset if you go out ahead of them. But these reforms and these changes will involve I think the most radical change in the structure of the civil service in over 40 years, and it respond, I think, to much of the debate that's been circulating, particularly since 2008. I'm fairly happy during the Q&A to touch on some of these issues that we're addressing. Finally, just the link between accountability and performance. I think a crucial issue when we're debating this is how do we deal with the question of underperformance. And in the mind of some commentators, this is the only issue. I see strength and accountability as key to improving performance across the board, rather than primarily addressing underperformance. And as a system, if we can improve the performance of the majority of people who work in the system by encouraging them more, by investing more in them, or whatever means, well then over time then we can improve significantly the services we provide to citizens, and we can improve the quality of the policy advice that we give to government. My own experience, and this is contrary to perception, my own experience is that the number of consistent underperformers in our system is quite low, but that level of underperformance, any level, should not and cannot be tolerated, and we do need to address it. And the renewal plan, we are setting out practical and specific actions that enable us to make progress in this area. This involves supporting managers in implementing measures to address underperformance, professionalising HR, providing access to legal supports and practical support for people who are engaging in enhancing the performance of individuals who can do better. But of course, managing a straight performance in any environment presents challenges. Employment law applies equally to public and private sectors. In the public sector, there is scope to apply disciplinary procedures, up including dismissal, where appropriate. But on a few issues, there is a difference between the public and private sector. The private sector has more financial freedom to address issues and move people out by providing financial packages, while protecting individuals' reputation and ensuring it's done in a way which doesn't reveal the full extent of the difficulties. Given the financial transparency and constraints exist in the civil service, that type of approach of, in effect, signing a cheque to moving somebody out isn't available in our system. And I think there is a need for a debate. I think a debate on this would be very welcome to see the extent to which we can be given some of the tools that are available elsewhere into try managing some exits where we see that performance is not up to it. There are also issues, I think, related to this around pay and around paying the rate for a job. And I think people are willing to have a much more informed debate about how we reward civil servants and how we reward people in the public sector if they see that they're paying for accountable individuals who are seen to deliver and are seen to be genuinely expert in their field. So, in conclusion, I would say that there is much about our system which is excellent and we should be proud of. We recognise that we need to improve and we need to embrace this change. And I'm very confident that Minister Howard and the Government will set a very ambitious programme in September which will challenge us and certainly address many of the concerns that people have. Thank you very much.